All right, ready to dive deep into Thomas Aquinas.
Always ready for some Aquinas.
We've got like all the good stuff, the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy, his original work.
The Summa Theologica,
Oh
yeah.
yeah, we're going for it. A real philosophical feast.
It's going to be good, especially for, for philosophers. Aquinas is fascinating. The way he brings together ancient thought, like Aristotle and theology, creates a system that still has impact, like centuries later.
Right, this isn't just like dusty old history, you know?
No,
We're
no.
talking big questions. God, the universe, the human mind, stuff philosophers are still like totally debating.
Exactly. And Aquinas does it in a way that tries to bridge faith and reason. He doesn't see them as like enemies, but as like working together.
Okay, so before we get to the really mind-blowing stuff,
Yeah.
quick recap. Who is this guy?
Thomas Aquinas, born in Italy around 1225, he chose to join the Dominican order.
Those are the like scholar preacher types, right?
Yeah, those guys. He studied under Albert the Great, another major figure who was, kind of bringing Aristotle into Christian theology.
So Aquinas is already in this world where like faith and ancient philosophy are all mixed up.
Right.
No wonder he took that approach.
Yeah, exactly. And it's important to note that taking this stance, this whole faith and reason are compatible thing, it was pretty radical for his time. Really sets the stage for how he approaches everything.
Okay, speaking of radical, let's talk about how Aquinas tries to like prove God's existence.
Yeah.
And not just through faith, but through logic.
Yeah.
His famous 5 ways.
Yes, the 5 ways. This is where his deep dive into Aristotle really shows. He lays out these arguments, the unmoved mover, the first cause, that have really intrigued philosophers for centuries.
Okay, break it down for me. Like, what's the core idea behind these arguments?
Essentially, Aquinas is saying that everything we observe, in the universe, it has to have a starting point. Something had to set this whole chain of cause and effect in motion.
Like a cosmic domino effect.
Yeah, like that. Exactly. And that ultimate first cause, the one that needs no cause itself, that's what Aquinas identifies as God.
So it's not just like God created the universe and then was just like, okay, I'm done.
No, not at all. For Aquinas, God is constantly involved, actively sustaining the universe. He's not just the initiator, but the continuous source of existence.
Okay, so we've got God as the ultimate cause.
Mhm.
But what about the universe itself?
Ah.
What's Aquinas' take on that?
Now, this is where it gets really interesting, I think, from a philosophical standpoint. Aquinas, following Christian doctrine, he believed that God created the universe out of nothing.
Out of nothing.
Ex nihilo.
Ex nihilo. But wait a minute. Didn't he also like entertain this idea that the universe could be eternal even though it was created?
Yeah.
That seems like a paradox.
It is a paradox, and one that Aquinas really wrestles with. You have to remember, he's working within this Aristotelian framework where everyone just assumed the universe was eternal.
So how does he square that circle? An eternal universe, but also created by God.
It's a very complex issue, and Aquinas doesn't really offer a simple solution. But what's important is this. For him, creation, whether it happened at a specific point in time or eternally, always points back to a creator.
And that creation has a purpose, right?
Absolutely.
It's not just random.
Not just some random thing. The purpose of creation, for Aquinas, is to reflect God's goodness and glory. Everything in the universe, in a sense, participates in that divine purpose.
All right, that's a lot to unpack already.
It is, yeah.
We've got God who creates and sustains the universe.
Yes.
And that universe exists to reflect his goodness.
Mm-hmm.
Now, where do we fit into all of this?
Right. Well, that brings us to one of the most, fundamental philosophical problems, right?
Yeah.
The mind-body problem.
Oh, okay.
Is our mind just a product of our physical brain, or is there something more going on?
That is a question that still keeps philosophers up at night,
Definitely.
tossing and turning.
And Aquinas certainly had some thoughts on it. He draws on Aristotle's concept of form and matter. The idea that everything in the material world is a combination of these two principles.
Okay, so like, give me an example. How does form and matter apply to, say, a tree?
All right, so the matter of the tree would be the physical stuff, right? Wood, leaves, sap.
Right?
The form is what makes it a tree, specifically its shape, its growth patterns, its ability to photosynthesize.
So the form is like the organizing principle that gives the matter its specific identity.
Exactly. But when it comes to humans, Aquinas says the soul is special.
Ah, yes, the soul. The big question is, what is it, and where does it fit into this whole form and matter scheme?
For Aquinas, the soul is both the form of the body, meaning it gives us our specific human shape and characteristics, and a subsistent thing.
Hold on, subsistent. What does that mean?
It means that the soul, in Aquinas's view, can exist on its own, apart from the body.
So are we talking full-blown Cartesian dualism here, the mind and body as, like, completely separate entities?
It's not quite that simple. It's more like dualism with a twist. Aquinas firmly believes that the human soul is immortal. It doesn't just vanish when we die, but he also sees the soul and body as very intimately connected during our earthly existence.
Okay, so we've got an immortal soul that's somehow both connected to and separate from the body. That's a lot to wrap our heads around.
It certainly is. And it leads us to another fascinating question. How does this soul, this immaterial entity, actually think? What's Aquinas' take on the process of human thought?
Let's dive into that. I'm ready to explore how a 13th century thinker explains the workings of the mind.
Well, for Aquinas, thought, it's not just this like mystical process, he breaks it down into a system involving our senses, imagination, and intellect.
Right, yeah, because like we're not born knowing everything. We gather knowledge through experience, yeah.
Exactly. Aquinas would say he starts with our senses, right, perceiving the world around us. But then the question is, how do we move from those specific sensor experiences to understanding universal concepts?
Yeah, like for example, how do I go from seeing one, particular furry creature to grasping the idea of catness, something that applies to all cats?
Right, exactly. That's where Aquinas brings in the agent intellect,
The agent intellect.
like our internal processor, you could say. That helps us abstract those universal concepts from our concrete experiences.
So it's not just passively receiving, like, sensory data.
Right,
There's this, like, active element within us that's making sense of it all.
precisely. And that's a crucial distinction for Aquinas. He doesn't want to reduce human thought to just like a reflection of the material world.
This agent intellect sounds pretty powerful.
Yeah.
But if all our knowledge, like, ultimately comes from our senses,
Mm-hmm.
does that mean we can never be truly certain about anything?
Right.
I mean, our senses can be deceived, right?
That's a deep, deep philosophical question. And Aquinas, being the good philosopher that he is, he grapples with it. He develops this theory of knowledge that he calls scientia.
Scientia.
A way of knowing that aims for certainty.
Scientia. So like a kind of scientific knowledge.
It's more, I think it's more about a very rigorous process of building knowledge. Imagine it like a pyramid.
Okay, I'm visualizing. I've got a pyramid.
At the base, you have self-evident truths, things that are like undeniable,
Okay.
like the principle of non-contradiction. And from there, you use logic and reason to build up to more complex knowledge.
So it's about like establishing a solid foundation and then carefully constructing your understanding from there.
Exactly. But Aquinas also recognizes that there are limits to what we can know with absolute certainty through reason alone. Some things like the existence of God or the nature of the soul, they require a different kind of knowing.
That's where faith comes in, right?
Yes, faith plays a crucial role in Aquinas' system, but it's not blind faith. It's a kind of intellectual assent that's supported by reason and revelation.
So faith and reason are kind of working together.
Right.
Even when we're dealing with things beyond the reach of pure logic.
Absolutely. And this brings us to another big philosophical question, right?
Uh-huh.
Free will.
Free will, the classic.
Do we genuinely have control over our choices? Or is everything predetermined?
Oh, this one's been a philosophical head-scratcher for ages. And I know Aquinas, he's trying to hold together this idea of God's plan, but also our ability to make real choices.
Mm-hmm.
How does he do that?
It's a delicate balancing act.
Yeah.
On the one hand, Aquinas argues that our will is a self-mover, meaning we have the inherent capacity to make choices freely.
So like when I decide, you know what, I'm going to have another cup of coffee. That's really my decision,
Right.
not like some external force pulling the string.
Precisely. But then Aquinas also brings in God as the first cause of, well, everything, including our actions.
Hold on. So is God ultimately controlling my coffee cravings? That doesn't sound very free.
It's not about God like directly dictating each choice we make. It's more subtle than that. What Aquinas is trying to say is God provides the framework, the context for our free will to operate within.
So God might have, like, given me a love for coffee,
Right.
but it's still up to me whether I indulge it right now.
You got it. This is where Aquinas gets into some really, really interesting philosophical territory. He's essentially arguing for a form of compatibilism, the idea that free will and determinism can coexist.
Okay, I could see how that could work, but it definitely raises more questions. Like, is Aquinas saying that our freedom is limited? And if so, how does that square with our moral responsibility?
Those are excellent questions and ones that Aquinas himself wrestled with. But let's shift gears a bit and explore how this, intricate philosophical system actually translates into practical ethics.
Okay.
How does Aquinas view the good life, and what role do virtues play?
All right, I'm ready to move from the metaphysical to a more down-to-earth. How do we actually live according to Aquinas? Okay, so we've got this like whole intricate philosophical system, right? But how does it actually like play out in everyday life? What's the Aquinas version of, living well?
Well, for Aquinas, it all kind of boils down to happiness, but not just any fleeting pleasure. He's talking about true, lasting happiness, the kind that comes from fulfilling our ultimate purpose.
So not winning the lottery or like indulging every passing whim. What's the deeper source of this happiness then?
Aquinas, being a theologian as well as a philosopher, he'd say that true happiness ultimately comes from union with God. But that doesn't mean we have to wait until, the afterlife to experience it.
So how do we tap into that happiness here and now? Is it all about like constant prayer and contemplation?
Those are certainly important. But Aquinas also really emphasizes the role of reason and virtue in loving a good life. This is where his famous concept of natural law comes into play.
Natural law, isn't that about like laws of nature, like, gravity? How does that relate to ethics?
It's about using our reason to figure out what's truly good for us, based on our nature as human beings. Aquinas believed that we have certain inherent inclinations toward self-preservation, toward knowledge, toward living in community.
So these inclinations are like signposts, kind of, pointing us towards what's morally right.
Exactly. They're not just arbitrary rules imposed from outside, but principles that are, rooted in our very being. And by following these natural inclinations, we actually move closer to fulfilling our purpose and experiencing true happiness.
Okay, so natural law gives us this like framework for understanding what's good. But how do we actually become good people? Is it all just about willpower? Just like gritting our teeth and trying really hard not to be jerks?
Willpower is definitely important, but Aquinas puts a lot of emphasis on developing virtues. Think of them as habits of character that dispose us to act in accordance with the good.
Like honesty, courage, compassion, that sort of thing.
Precisely. And for Aquinas, virtues aren't just about isolated actions. It's about cultivating these dispositions so deeply that they become like part of who we are, second nature, as he calls it.
So it's not enough to just do the right thing. You have to want to do the right thing, have that inner motivation.
Exactly. Virtue, for Aquinas, it allows us to act morally without constant struggle or inner conflict.
But isn't that setting the bar pretty high? Most of us aren't like saints or anything.
Aquinas would say that we're all capable of striving toward virtue, even if we never reach perfection. And it's that striving, that ongoing effort to align ourselves with the good that ultimately matters.
Well, that's somewhat reassuring. But are there like certain virtues that are more important than others? Like, is there a hierarchy?
Aquinas highlights what he calls the cardinal virtues: prudence, justice, fortitude, and temperance. And then there are the theological virtues: faith, hope, and charity.
Okay, so those cardinal virtues, those sound pretty familiar. Prudence, like being wise and thoughtful, justice, treating people fairly, fortitude, facing challenges with courage, and temperance, moderation in all things. What about those theological virtues? Are those like just for the super religious?
Not at all. For Aquinas, these virtues are essential for everyone because they direct us toward our ultimate end union with God, which is the source of true happiness.
So even if someone doesn't like explicitly believe in God, these virtues, faith, hope, and love, those can still contribute to a good life.
Absolutely. Think of faith as trust, hope as striving for something better, and charity as love in its purest form. These are qualities that, they enrich any human life, regardless of one's religious beliefs.
Okay, my brain is officially doing philosophical backflips. So Aquinas gives us this intricate system. God is the first causes, a universe that reflects his goodness. Humans with these immortal souls striving towards virtue and happiness. That's a lot to take in.
It is a vast and complex system, but that's what makes it so fascinating. Aquinas offers us a framework for understanding ourselves and our place in the cosmos, a way of integrating faith and reason, and a path towards a truly fulfilling life.
And what's amazing is that even though he was writing way back in the 13th century, so much of what he says still resonates with philosophers today.
He was truly a philosophical giant, someone who grappled with the deepest questions of, human existence, and offered insights that continue to challenge and inspire us.
Well, I think we've covered a lot of ground in this deep dive into Aquinas.
We've only just scratched the surface. There's so much more to explore in his writings.
Exactly. And for all you philosophers out there listening, here's a thought to ponder. If Aquinas were suddenly transported to the 21st century, what would he make of contemporary philosophy? Would he see his own ideas reflected in modern thinkers? What would he challenge? What would he critique? Just some food for thought. Until our next deep dive, keep those philosophical gears turning.